I want to welcome to the podcast Father Matthew Rolling. A little bit of bio. Father Matthew has an undergraduate degree in fisheries and wildlife, and we'll just stop right there, and then it makes so much sense why we brought him on to talk to us about philosophy. Father Matthew, I think that's so cool that you have an undergraduate fisheries and wildlife, but you have a lot of other degrees. So undergraduates in philosophy and theology, but then you have a doctorate in philosophy from the Pontifical University of St. Thomas in Rome. Most people have heard that name as the Angelicum. And so Father is a Catholic priest, philosophy professor, who serves as an academic dean at St. Gregory the Great Seminary, and that's the college seminary for the Diocese of Lincoln, Nebraska. So, Father Matthew, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, it's great to be with you guys this morning. Thanks for having me on.
Father, all three of us actually met on a call for a ministry that works with a priest, a former guest of ours on the show, Matt Rudolph, and Chrism Ministry. So he had brought together this group of people to almost think tank and talk through the support of seminarians, priests, bishops, etc. And when everyone went around and did their introductions, Father Matthew, when you did yours, I stopped and went, "You got to be kidding me. There's a guy who is an expert in Thomistic philosophy and also knows about healing." And then I reached out to Bob. I was like, "Bob, we have to have Father Matthew on." So here we are. We're finally here. I'm super excited. So I'm going to kick us off with a question, and then we'll just let things roll from there. So, Father Matthew, like, you're familiar with the healing realm. You're familiar with the podcast and all these dynamics. You and I had a cool conversation one-on-one. So here's a big general one. Why does philosophy even matter when it comes to healing and the healing process, etc.?
Great question. First, maybe I would back up and just answer the question of why does philosophy matter at all? Because that might help us to really get into the question of why it matters for healing. Philosophy, I think in the modern conversation, has probably been really discounted because people just think, well, this is irrelevant to daily life. This isn't helpful. I remember having a conversation with some undergraduate students at one point. I won't name names or universities, but they were studying philosophy and they were going to have a midterm exam for this class. And I was asking them while I was studying for my degree in philosophy, I said, "Oh, are you guys ready for your exam tomorrow? Do you need to study or anything?" And one of the students, without missing a beat, looked at me and said, "Oh, it's fine. It's a philosophy test. I can just make up whatever I want." And I about lost my mind, but I didn't say anything to the students. But I think that's a real sentiment, is people think that philosophy is just something that you can just make up, right?
Wow. Yes.
And in the classic or the ancient sense, so classic, we think of like St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, or in the ancient sense of like Aristotle or Plato, the notion of philosophy is to seek wisdom, to seek an understanding of things that really are, and to seek an order to the world and to reality. And so, philosophy is one way of looking at reality. We could think about, for example, science is another way of looking at reality, or medicine, or math, or economics. These are all different ways of looking at reality. Philosophy just wants to look at reality in the most basic sense, in the deepest sense, and to get a sense of how things are, why things are, what things are, and to come to a deep appreciation of all that is and all that God has created. So then in healing, I would say that in general, philosophy just seeks to have a grasp of what is, and the way that things are, and the way that things are supposed to be, and what things are for. That helps us to see when things have gone off, right? And so in healing, there's a recognition that something has gone off the rails, off track. And if we understand reality as it really is, then we begin to see the way that things are supposed to be on track. And philosophy helps to aid us on the path to getting the right direction and setting the right direction for healing.
And you're an expert in St. Thomas? Is that your basic background? So does Thomas address that in a specific way related to healing, or is it more you extrapolate from his philosophy?
Yeah, it's a good question. He doesn't actually talk about much of this in any particular or developed way. One of the things that really has helped my thought in this is Pope John Paul II, when he was still Karol Wojtyła, gave a lecture in Lubin on Thomistic personalism, is what he called it. Mm-hmm. And in this presentation, this lecture, he talked about how Thomas's approach to the human person was more of an objective approach, whereas the personalist approach, which JP2 embraced, and which a lot of kind of some of the more modern philosophers, I think of, for example, Jacques Maritain was a little bit of a personalist, Emmanuel Mounier, names like that, Gabriel Marcel. JP2 is highlighting for us that these personalist approach is more of the subjective approach, the individual approach. So what Thomas is doing is laying out what the human person is in a much broader way, in a much more generic way, but it's still a really valuable way. So he's laying a lot of the big foundation blocks that we can build on to ask these very specific questions around healing and the human person.
It jumps out to me, Father, like right out of the gate, because, when you get into the domains of psychology, and maybe we can go there in a second, because I don't know, how many people know that the word psychology, the Greek word for psyche, is literally soul. And so it's the study of the soul is what psychology is supposed to do. But go to any major secular university and good luck learning much about the soul. And so what's interesting about what you just said, and this is the stuff that I don't know why, I'm just passionate about it. You said it's an understanding of what really is, like the way things actually are. So there's a humility to philosophy when you go in, and so and you can't just make it up, because that means you can just make up reality, which is ironically the antithesis of philosophy. So thus you almost lost your whatever ever-loving mind with people who were just like, oh, I could just make it up. It doesn't matter. We were like, no, you missed the whole point. But yet there's this dynamic that does creep into modern psychology and can creep into healing where, you're just kind of making it up as you go. And, you could go to a lot of psychologists who the approach, literally, like almost the approach to the healing that they're trying to offer is whatever works for you. And in some ways, I'm saddened by that. I'm grieved by that. I'm frustrated by that, because where that's leading people is to not thriving. That's not going to end up working, because there are, again, you said it, there are objective realities. There's where Aquinas is like par excellence and on helping us understand reality in the objective sense. But I think people get frustrated by only talking about the objective, because then they're like, but what about my experience? And what about my everyday life? What about the pain that I felt when such and such happened or didn't happen? And then John Paul II goes, oh, that matters too. And it, like, Father Matthew, what strikes you about what I'm saying? Like, what stirs in your heart as a philosopher with regard to that balancing act that's necessary with the objective and subjective in healing?
Yeah, two things. The first thing is that, when Aquinas writes all of his texts, there's a line that jumps out to me from Pope Leo XIII's document on the restoration of Christian philosophy from 1879. And in that, he's describing what the church's relationship to philosophy has been over the course of the last 1800 years, and talking about how even in scripture there's sort of philosophical ideas that make their way in from the Greeks and from the Israelites' encounter with all these other nations. And then the fathers of the church from the earliest days, names like Justin Martyr or John Chrysostom, St. Augustine, they're all doing philosophy to try and set up a way to evangelize the world. And so philosophy is not foreign to the church's project. But at a certain point, when it comes to Thomas, because of a variety of things, has the capacity to garner together all of these varied sources of scripture and the ancient Greek philosophers and the fathers of the church. And this line that Leo XIII quotes, he says, Thomas seems to have gathered the intellect of them all. And so he has just gathered together all of these seeds of thought and truth that have been found in all these different areas, and organizes and systematizes all these ideas into a coherent whole, which might get us down the road to healing and wholeness and integration. But what happens in the modern project is very different from Thomas's approach. Is the modern project disintegrates our thoughts and disintegrates reality and truth, and ultimately it makes the project of philosophy more about what's in my mind than in what's in reality. And Thomas's approach is first to look at reality and then to let it form my mind, whereas the modern approach starts with the mind and sort of forms reality on that way, And much of modern science, not just psychology, but a variety of other things, really have been governed by that approach to the human person. And so that's kind of the second piece that comes to mind as I think about this. It just the way that our way of looking at ourselves as human beings has in some ways been corrupted, disintegrated as a whole in the whole Western tradition of thought. And so this disintegration that we talk about when it comes to healing and things, it's in the water, so to speak, of our culture for those reasons and for many others besides.